You're listening to Tulsa Talks, a Tulsa People podcast, episode 10. I'm your host, Anna Bennett. This episode of Tulsa Talks is brought to you by the Gilcrease Museum, presenting the exhibit Americans All. On this Season 1 finale, I talk with Mazen Abufadil, an artist, educator, and immigrant, whose work is currently featured at the Gilcrease Museum. Plus, Jerry Wofford takes a look back at the best musical moments of 2018. So let's talk Tulsa.
Morgan Phillips.
Monday, Tulsa Talks.
I'll take
Local music.
This is Ann Brockman.
Weekend Report. Anna Bennett.
Yeah, imagine.
Tulsa Talks. Stick around.
In school in Lebanon, and every opportunity we had to make art, whether it was working with clay or finger paints or whatever. I mean, that was my favorite thing, and I had stacks and stacks of these drawings or little sculptures or whatever it is that I did. And that's what I wanted to do. That's it. And I was, young, very little.
And now you're getting to do that.
I'm getting to do that. I'm very fortunate.
Yeah.
Very fortunate.
There are two things I notice immediately about Mazen Abufadil. He's got a quiet voice and a curious mind. After finishing the interview and leaving the office, he was back moments later to share an observation he'd had while looking at a nearby sycamore tree, just to make sure I knew his updated viewpoint, even though the mics were already off. But that's just who Mazen is, an educator as much as an artist, one who's generous with his time and knowledge. His unflappable patience, no doubt a boon in the classroom, is honed by raising 4 children of his own. Mazen was born in Lebanon and spent his earliest years in Beirut. But life changed forever for Mazen and his family in the late 1970s. The Lebanese Civil War broke out, bringing with it years of violent conflict. Mazen's family fled to the United States in the late 70s. He shared his recollections of arriving in Tulsa during our interview.
It was very odd coming here because it seemed so vast, so large. Everything was far away. I grew up my formative years in the city, and in the city, it's everything is close, and you step out your door, and there's always some kind of action, some kind of activity.
That must have been so strange to see just like nothing.
Yeah, it was very strange because I lived in the heart of the city in Beirut, so when I was a kid, and it was very busy,
right?
Very busy place.
Right.
Over here, you could drive, of course, for a long distance, especially back then, and see nothing. So when we arrived and got off the plane, got my uncle and aunt's car, it was cold. It was very cold, which I had experienced, of course, but I got in the car. It was very warm in the car. She had the heater cranked up and drove back what seemed to be forever, took forever, and I could see nothing out there. It was dark, but I'm used to seeing lights at least and cars, and I could see nothing. It was kind of a strange but very comfortable experience. Yeah, I felt very safe.
Despite his lifelong connection to art, Mazen took a bit of a circuitous route to get to his current career path.
It was actually, I kind of had a stint off at one point. I left school for a while, went back to school, realized what I had been doing wasn't what I should be. I was a biology major, and I minored in chemistry. And that wasn't what I should have been doing. I loved it, but it wasn't what I needed to be doing. So
What made you realize that you needed to go back to school and pursue art?
Well, I dropped out of school, and when I dropped out, I had to find something to do. My parents had a sandwich shop, and all our lives, my brother and I worked with them. And so I thought, well, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to open up a sandwich shop like my parents. So I started working and realized this is pretty tough if I'm doing it full time. Mm-hmm. Get up in the morning, get there at 7, and don't leave till after 9. And your friends want to go out, and you say, no way, man, I'm tired. I don't want to go anywhere. So I went back to school. Yeah.
And what did you discover when you were at school? How did you find something that energized you creatively?
Well, as far as the art's concerned, I've always wanted to do it, but it wasn't something that I was kind of given a green light to do.
Right.
It wasn't that my parents were like completely against me doing art. It just wasn't in our concept of how to become a professional.
Right.
I had to be a doctor or a lawyer, and my dad knew I loved art, and so he said, well, be an architect, so it's more professional. So when I finally went back to school and did another semester of biology and realized that's a problem, and so I didn't tell anybody, I just decided to do art.
At what point did you tell? At what point did you
I-
tell your family that
I slowly let them,
switch
I
majors?
started showing them things, So when I had an opportunity to do a little study abroad, I decided, of course, Florence was the place to go, and it was just beautiful stepping off the bus. I had no place to stay when I arrived. I had no connections, didn't know anybody. I just had a bag, and I thought, I'm going to try it. That's what everybody kind of set up with a family, and I knew I had enrolled in the college there, but that was about all I did. And so I got accepted into the college, and I arrived, and they let me off the bus. And then everybody else I had met that was on the same plane, I guess, went to wherever they were supposed to go specifically together, but I started kind of walking around trying to figure out where I'm going to go, but it was magical. I was walking on these great cobblestones, and I could hear beautiful language in my ear. The Italian was beautiful, and I found a place, of course, to stay, and the light was excellent, and it was just like a dream.
Mazen's time in Italy exposed him to a concept that is still at the crux of his artistic process, the fresco. Traditionally, fresco is defined as the art of painting on freshly spread moist lime plaster with water-based pigment. Once the plaster dries, the painting is an integral part of the surface itself, frequently a wall. Although he uses more modern materials than his Renaissance forebears, like digital photography, the medium remains as unpredictable as ever. Something Mazen sees as a strength, not a weakness, of the process.
I could say I have about 70% success.
But I bet you learn a lot from the other 30%.
Yeah. I mean, if the weather is not right and it's been raining a lot and I haven't timed it quite right, or I've misjudged the dampness of the plaster, I have to start all over. And if I'm working on a really large piece in sections, then I'll just have to scrape it all off, or scrape the section off that didn't work and reprint it, which is what traditional fresco artists have had to do. Working on the Sistine Chapel ceiling, you paint a painting and you paint up a certain part of it. Then the plaster stops absorbing. That's it. It rejects the pigment. And then what you do is you stop and you scrape off right up to an edge where it does not look like you've done any kind of scraping. And then the next bit that you're going to apply is applied. The next bit of the lime you'll apply is right up to the edge that you scraped off, and you'll start fresh.
Wow.
Like I said, 70% of the time it's pretty good. 30%, I'm pulling what's left of my hair out. So, but that's the beauty of it. Yeah, that's what I like about it. Probably. Yeah. It's not predictable.
It probably wouldn't be nearly as thrilling if you knew exactly what it was going to look like every time. Right. What do you think that the possibility of imperfection or indeed disaster, what do you think that adds to the finished work? That's
the best part of it. That's the best part of it. That's my favorite thing. Mm-hmm. I like the flaw. Because that flaw is what describes the whole process. It's all there in that flaw. And also the flaw is an indirect recording of the time I have spent making the work. Mm. The flaw is like time. I value time a lot because time does a lot of creation independent of the human being, right? And the flaw is kind of like that. I have nothing to do with it. I didn't make a flaw. It's either I choose to accept the flaw if I like it, and then I have to respect it and appreciate it and say this is part of the piece. Mm. Or not, and I reject it and say that's too much flaw, and I have to move on. Right. So I love that thing. Sometimes the flaw is so overwhelming. A big chunk of this comes off, and I'll find myself kind of frustrated because it wasn't successful. But then I go back and look at it again and think actually that might be the most successful one, and then I feel that individual piece has its own life. I've just kind of helped it get there, and it makes me feel good.
The art was in there the whole time.
Yeah.
You just had to bring it along on its journey.
Yeah, it's kind of almost like another world that we kind of had an opportunity to have a communication, a little bit of communication there.
That's so much fun. I've actually played a little bit with Mod Podge. The company makes a photo transfer glue, and you're supposed to use it on like a black and white copy to get like an exact transfer, but that's boring. So I have been playing with it using like magazine paper, which is a very different feel. It's a very different ink on top of it, and it creates like this strange sort of like stretchy facsimile. And a lot of times like the chemicals react weirdly with the color, and so it like totally transforms and disturbs the original image. Take some water to it and buff away as much of the paper as I can while still leaving that little film of color and of pattern. But it is like so unpredictable and so imperfect and so kind of gnarly almost. But that's like, I love using materials for things that they weren't originally designed for, because you can make discoveries. Yeah,
no, it's exciting. That's all there is to it. And it's not only exciting; it's beautiful, and it cannot be done. You can't repeat it.
Yeah, you can't do it on purpose.
It's an original piece. I mean, every piece that I'm making is an original piece for that exact reason. Also, that's probably one of the things that I really love about working in the wet darkroom as opposed to digital, even though every digital print is just very slightly different than the other, but not so much so that it's perceptible.
Right.
Whereas working in the darkroom, the chemicals are slightly older or more fresh than they were earlier.
The humidity outside is a little
whatever it is, exactly. I bumped the enlarger and doubled the image accidentally. Something's, that's dramatic, but, I'm just saying there's something really nice about the darkroom for that reason. And there's also something nice about the rhythm of working in the darkroom, just kind of dipping a paper into the developer and kind of agitating this tray and kind of feeling nice, taking a deep breath and letting it drain and moving on to the stop. And it again, feels great.
The time aspect. Time is one of your tools that you have to use in the darkroom.
Yeah.
We'll be right back with the rest of this conversation after a quick word from our sponsors. If you're looking for a warm place to spend a winter day, perhaps with holiday company in town, venture to Gilcrease Museum, one of the region's premier American art and history museums. Meet the first black cowboy to be featured in a comic strip in their latest exhibition, The Chisholm Kid, Lone Fighter for Justice for All. The recently opened exhibition pays homage to the black cowboys who drove longhorns up the Chisholm Trail during the years following the Civil War. As mentioned in this episode of Tulsa Talks, the ongoing Americans All invites you to take a closer look at the American experience through immigrant artwork. The exhibit includes the works of 26 immigrant artists and several local first-generation immigrant artists. And before the end of the month, make sure to experience Albert Bierstadt, Witness to a Changing West, a landmark exhibition highlighting the career of one of the greatest landscape painters of all time, Albert Bierstadt. See this once-in-a-lifetime exhibition and discover the impact this landscape artist had on early conservation. To plan your next visit, go to gilcrease.org. Mazen, so an A in the A?
It's a very difficult name. Because that A doesn't really exist here, and so it's not like ma and it's not like ma. It's somewhere in between. It's Mazen.
Mazen,
yeah.
Mazen.
Yeah.
It's almost like a E.
Almost like a E.
Mazen.
Mazen. Yeah, that's very good.
Mazen. Sort of.
Wow,
like,
that was very good.
Okay.
Excellent.
Mazen. Sort of like mezzanine.
Yeah, close, but not quite the E.
Okay.
Yeah.
Welcome back to Tulsa Talks. I'm your host, Anna Bennett. That was Mazen Abufadil, whose name I was still struggling with. Mazen has spent the past 2 decades teaching art and photography at Holland Hall, and he says that his experience as a teacher is totally entwined to his life as a professional artist.
I think that experience is what brought me to where I am. So this is my 20th year there, and prior to that, I've worked elsewhere, a couple of places. But not that level, high school and junior high. I've just grown a lot as an individual and as a visual artist, seeing what they come up with that I might not have taken into consideration, or they give me an opportunity to to reflect upon my work. And they're very direct. Students are direct and sincere, and I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So it's been the best thing for me.
So you said 20 years?
This is my 20th, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And wow, I mean, photography itself, particularly our relationship to taking photos, has changed so much.
Yeah.
Like, especially now, I'm sure all these kids have iPhones
Right.
in their pocket, and, they have a very different relationship with taking an image than someone would 20 years ago. How is that proliferation of technology and the accessibility of taking photos changed the way that you've approached photography in the classroom?
I've definitely had to approach things differently because when you picked up a camera that had a roll of film in it, 2 decades ago, when you picked up a camera that had a roll of film in it, you were committed to every time you pressed the shutter release button. You were committed. Not only were you committed, like you just shot one piece, but it means that you also just lost one frame, because you can only have 36 or 24, however much you decide to load in there. And so you slowed down. You have to be very slow and be very thoughtful and take your time composing. But when we pick up our phones or a digital camera, we could snap a billion pictures and then make some choices later on. And so many of them we don't even look at, Mm-hmm. And so it's very loose commitment. And so what I have most students at the introductory level do is shoot film. They need to slow down a bit. They need to take their time to make a good composition. They need to think about why they picked their camera up in the first place, and tell them, make it count. If you picked your camera up and made the effort to do it, make it count, because not only are you going to make the effort to shoot the picture, you're going to make the effort to process the film. Mm-hmm. And then to make the print. Mm-hmm. And if you're making a print that you're not going to enjoy, what's the point of all that energy? There's an experience, it's valuable, mm-hmm. but, if you slow down, you'll probably have a greater sense of satisfaction when you look at your images.
Yeah. And
then we don't do the digital until much later, once they've refined their skills in terms of compositional skills, and they've learned to slow down. And then they can shoot digital, but they look at the digital camera just like then they look at the film camera, and then they look at the computer and working with Photoshop as if they were working with the darkroom, as opposed to saying Photoshop is for tricks and putting dogs' heads on people. That's not what it's for. It can be for that. Yeah. That's okay. Yeah. That's okay. That's fine. But if you go back to some of the fundamentals that you had established in the darkroom, then you can make beautiful photographs not because they're cool only, not because wow,
computers, digital.
It can go beyond that. There's a depth to the image, and you can't do that if you just start with that. So.
Interesting. So because of that process, they learn to see digital cameras and Photoshop as just another tool rather than this is the way photos are made.
Right. It's another tool. Yeah. And I have several students who have started in the darkroom, do, a year and a half or so in the darkroom. Several will really enjoy what we do there, but then they're excited about going into color because we don't have the facilities for doing color darkroom work. And so we did way in the past, but now it's not practical.
Yeah, but you have to have a whole other set of chemicals.
A whole other set of chemicals, another room, everything is different.
Wow.
And so they go into the digital because they're all of a sudden able to work with color. And that's great. They're excited about the whole color thing. But because they have established the fundamentals in the darkroom, they haven't forgotten what makes a good composition, what makes them feel good about their composition. And so then they start working with color, and it's actually easier for them to start to apply another layer, another level of understanding, which is color on top of that composition. And they're enjoying what they're doing. They think, well, I kind of miss the darkroom. And I've had several go back to the darkroom because there's something different about it.
What I love/hate about shooting on film, because digital photography has been around for most of my life, And so it's like, yeah, you take a picture and then you look at it. Well, you can't do that on a on a physical camera, but it almost makes you like you have to just hope for the best and then continue enjoying your day or enjoying your walk. You can't just sit there and fuss over this picture, that picture, which one looked better. It's like, well, if you were making a goofy face in that picture, we'll find out once we get this developed.
Yeah. Actually, you might spend a lot less time, as you said, fussing with your equipment and enjoying the opportunity you have. Yeah.
And then I think you, then when you do get the images back, you connect with them in a different way because you know, in my case, I sort of take rolls and rolls of film, forget about them, rediscover them, take them to get developed, and then I'm like, I totally forgot that I took these pictures. But it's like a unique rediscovery because those wouldn't have shown up on like my time hop or in my iPhoto library because they were sitting on a roll of film.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's like kind of revisiting a fragment of your history in some fashion.
Yeah. And the images are often imperfect or a little blurry in places, but sometimes that's the way memories look too.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
That's actually something, you know, talking about students, that's probably one of the greatest fears and the greatest obstacle students have is making a mistake. We're taught to, you know, not to show your work or have anything evident until you are done with it completely and it's perfect. Well, what's perfect, you know? I mean, people like, is it done? And they question me. They ask me, is this good enough? Well, I have to go back and say, well, is it good enough?
Yeah.
I mean, is this what you're looking for? And then they're afraid to, well, not really. I want to, you know, and I say, well, then do it. Well, what if I ruin it? Well, okay, then you
ruin it.
You move on, or you might do something that is spectacular, and then you'll take off.
Yeah.
But they're extremely afraid of doing that. Extremely afraid of doing that, and it's probably because everything they do, or not, I can't say everything. So much of what they do is predictable. So much of what they do is predictable with the technology they have at their hands.
Right. And just thinking about probably the vast majority of their day, you know, you do the math problem correctly, you get the right answer.
That's it.
You study as much as you can, therefore you understand chemistry and can, you know, predict the outcome. But suddenly they're asked to work with something that is unpredictable by its very nature. And I'm sure that that's a hard, I mean, you know, speaking for myself, that's been sort of the main takeaway of like becoming an adult is like, wait, nobody's giving me a grade. Like there's everything is grades.
Wish we could do away with them. Did I say that? I wish we could do away with them. I said it again because they can be, I know they can be very valuable in many ways, but they can hurt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like Mazen, I'm personally obsessed with art making as a process, so I was thrilled to get the full story behind Wouldn't You Like to Be a Pepper Too?, a photo fresco featuring a crushed can of Dr. Pepper that's now part of the Americans All exhibit at Gilcrease Museum.
In school in Lebanon, and every opportunity we had to make art, you know, whether it was working with clay or finger paints or whatever. I mean, that was my favorite thing, and I had stacks and stacks of these drawings or little sculptures or whatever it is that I did. And that's what I wanted to do. That's it. And I was, you know, young, very little.
And now you're getting to do that.
I'm getting to do that. I'm very fortunate.
Yeah.
Very fortunate.
And it seems like your work these days has continued to be very process-based, which seems to harken back to the drive to just need to create. Can you talk a little bit about your process and how you go about creating your pieces?
So I like to, you know, manipulate materials with my hands, right? I like to bend things, break things, tear things, you know, assemble things. It's very physical. It's not that I am unwilling to use digital technology. In fact, it's a real integral part of what I do. But I also like to feel things in my hands. And so when I was so my emphasis has always been photography, and then in grad school, I focused on both photography and printmaking. And I liked the physical part of printmaking. And I liked the darkroom in photography. Of course, I was started to do some digital then, but it wasn't a big deal yet. Digital was not a big deal yet. We're talking over 2 decades ago. And as I started working more in digital, I found a real satisfaction in what I could accomplish digitally, but then the whole tactile part was gone. It was indirect. Everything was indirect. I was working on a keyboard, working on something that's touch, and if I pushed too hard, it didn't matter. It didn't make a difference. I could push as hard as I want or as softly as I wanted, and it did the same thing, at least with the technology that was available all this time. And there was a disconnect. And so what I had discovered eventually is that I wanted to find a way to bring what I did digitally and what I had always done with my hands physically together. And that's what led to working on the fresco. And you mentioned Italy. That was how I was inspired. Regarding the fresco and the antiquity, Italy is what inspired me to kind of look a little deeper into the surface of these pieces of antiquity. I liked the way time kind of deteriorates the surfaces, and I wanted to work more along those lines. There's no one particular medium that's necessary. It's whatever is appropriate for the concept you have or the vision that you have. And so I will be shooting, let's say I shot 4x5, which is large format view camera, and not a digital back, just film. So I shot 4x5 color slide film. And I knew I wanted to go further with that. So what I had to do to go further with that, to bring it in, to take it into another material, is to, in some fashion, digitize it so that I can either burn it onto a plate, right, and then make some kind of print with it, or I could make the transfers that I have been doing most recently. And so that's what I did. I went and scanned it, high-resolution scan, and broke it up into several pieces that can be blown up into a much larger image. So then I take that, and after I digitize it, then I have to go back and come up with a way to take it back into something physical again, which is kind of peculiar. But
yeah, it goes from analog to digital.
To analog, and completely analog. So then I could either do something with like a photo etching. Right, I could do a photo etching. I could make a transparency in the dark room and then take that into a photo etching. But I wanted to do full color, so I decided not to do photo etching. What I started to do is started to make prints onto a substrate from an inkjet printer, an archival inkjet printer. But I started to make the prints onto a substrate that would not hold the pigment. So what that means is I could wipe it off. Well, it also means that I could transfer it. So I started transferring that onto slabs, fresco slabs. So fresco meaning, that it's a lime plaster that has not set yet, and that becomes extremely absorbent. Okay. And so when I lay down the pigment-laden substrate onto that and give it a chance to soften off of the substrate and and the pigment is sucked into the lime plaster, it binds with that. It creates a new compound. And the lime plaster, of course, eventually becomes limestone. It becomes hard and it's very permanent.
Wow.
So that's kind of going back into the analog part. But I needed the digital. I needed that to get to where I wanted to go analog.
Okay. And what sort of images do you find yourself drawn to in creating these pieces?
At that time, I was, and I continue to be thoroughly inspired by the space again. So when I first arrived here, it was space. And I guess it's come back to space. I love the sky here. I love the distance, actually. I spend a lot of time looking up at the sky. So that's
there's a lot to look at.
There is. It's a spectacular sky here. And so that I think is really important. But that was several years back, and now I find myself looking further into what I've always done, which is looking down. I look down and pick up little things, or I look around, of course, but looking down is big, and so I find myself that's kind of noticing little details, peculiarities where I'm stepping. And so the little can of Dr. Pepper that I had picked up at one point, that's on exhibit at the Gilcrease now. That was like that. That was kind of walking around and just kind of enjoying the walk that I had after I had dropped my daughter off at school. And I picked this thing up and kind of held on to it for a while. And like I do, I collect a bunch of things in the office, in the studio, hold on to them for a while, and then kind of look at them differently, under a light, under a camera,
What was it about the Dr. Pepper can that really connected to you?
Well, it's beautiful, the texture of the torn aluminum and the perfect paint, the letters and all the writing, but then when they're crushed and squished together, you can't read them anymore. But there's something really nice about the depth of the surface. Even though it was so perfectly crushed, obviously it had been rolled over by something quite heavy. And it's hard to describe what it was. It was almost like a drawing, because it was crushed so tightly.
Right.
So it became almost like a drawing.
Because it brought out all the little ridges,
yeah,
the contours.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah.
And so then you made a photograph of this crushed Dr. Pepper can, and then how did it end up on the rice paper?
Okay, so I photographed it. No, I didn't photograph it. I scanned it.
Okay.
I scanned it. This can I scanned.
Oh,
the actual can.
It was so flat. You could just put it in the
Yes,
scanner.
I did. I put it in a scanner.
Oh.
So I put this can in a flatbed scanner and scanned it. And I actually made a few different scans. And see, here's where the digital technology comes into play. So you can't do this as effectively with a camera. But then I took those scans, and now, I mean, you can do it with a camera, but it's not quite as simple to do in the darkroom as it is on a computer. And so I bring all those scans together and utilize certain elements of those scans so I can go ahead and create an image that feels like I just picked up the can. I want it to feel like I just picked up the can.
So it's like a composite of several
It's
scans?
definitely a composite of several scans. Because, photography in a single picture is the ultimate two-dimensional. We take our world and we try to simplify it in a single image. And it still is, all the work I'm doing is still two-dimensional in some way. But I want to give it at least somewhat of a third dimension. And so that's what the multiple scans are for.
Okay.
That
almost feels like what the Cubists did in trying to represent on a flat surface a three-dimensional object by having different views of it.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, when I work with my students, I want them to. Well, that's another story. I'll get back to that. I'll get back to that. But to talk about this, so I scanned it, and then I took that scan, several images, and took the composite, brought it together, and got the image that I was interested in printing. And then, take the what we call the rice paper. Actually, it's gumpy paper. A lot of people call it rice. I've called it rice so many times now that I'm just stuck with rice paper. But it's gumpy, which is very similar, a little heavier, and it's from mulberry. And I take the plaster, and it's mostly lime plaster, and I'll mix a little bit of the gypsum. It needs to have some gypsum as something to have it hold onto the tooth of the paper, because lime by itself needs something to hold onto. It's a physical holding on. It has to grab onto something, but gypsum will stick. So I'll mix a little bit of that in there with it and trowel it onto the paper and then smooth it out. And before it sets, it's extremely absorbent. There's a certain point where it rejects pigment, and there's a point where it absorbs it so readily. And I have to find just that right time. So I'll take the print. It will have been printed already, and it's sitting on the side. And the print is fresh, and because I'm using a paper incompatible with the printer, because I've had to modify my printer, I can wipe it. So what I'll do is if I want to manipulate it, I can do that right there. I can manipulate the print, and then I can lay it on to the damp plaster, give it a little bit of time to absorb, and then I will do a kind of almost a traditional transfer technique. I'll rub the back of it with some kind of object so that it kind of gets pushed into the plaster gently, and then peel it off. There's nothing left onto the substrate, and all the pigment has been absorbed into the plaster, and then it sets.
Wow.
So that's the process.
We'll be back with the rest of this conversation, but first, a look back at 2018's music scene standouts with Jerry Wofford. Welcome to the first annual Golden Wofford Awards. Tonight, Jerry Wofford from the Woody Guthrie Center selects his picks for the best local and regional music of 2018.
Hi, I'm Jerry Wofford with the Woody Guthrie Center, and here's my roundup of some of the best albums and songs that I heard of in 2018.
First, the award for Best Album to Listen to Endlessly on Repeat. And the Wofford goes to Carter Sampson's Lucky.
This album in particular is she took songs from a few other Oklahoma songwriters and kind of worked together to make them her own and do these different things with this music that was just like beautifully quintessential Carter Sampson.
Next up, the award for Artist You Absolutely Cannot Sleep On in 2019. And the Wofford goes to Sports.
I mean, definitely someone to keep an eye on is Sports. They've had some music that has made it to soundtracks, I believe, and they've got some pretty good attention in places like Spotify, where some of their songs have as many as 7 million listens already, which is really impressive for a band out of Oklahoma like that that's not making music that necessarily sounds like it's coming out of Oklahoma.
Next up, the award for Best New Artist, and the Golden Wofford goes to Ken Pomeroy.
She is just a really special musician, so young and so talented, and really has a great drive to make great music and bring that music to her fans and to us. Definitely check out the latest from Ken. She is very talented and is going to be doing a lot of great things to come.
Now, the award for Most Unusual Lyrics, and the Wofford goes to Chris Lee Becker.
Chris Lee Becker is a guy who makes really great songs and stories with his music, really creative, interesting songs that describe events and describe people, and he uses humor in a really great way that I think a lot of musicians around here really have a pretty good grasp of. If they want to kind of flex those muscles, Chris Lee Becker, I think, is one of the best around here for making music that is topical, making music that is particularly pretty funny.
And now, the award for Most Surprising Live Performance. And the Wofford goes to St. Paul and the Broken Bones at the Cain's Ballroom.
Definitely St. Paul and the Broken Bones was one that I was really delighted with and surprised by. They're a big band playing funk and soul music. They played at Cain's in the spring, I believe, and were just so full of energy and so excited and had such a big, full, great sound. And the lead singer was just a wild thing to watch. He at one point wrapped himself up like a big burrito in the rug that was on the middle of the stage, and it was just, the crowd went wild, and it was just seeing those kind of fun experiences like that, especially when you can tell that they're super into the show and they're feeding off the crowd's feeding off of what they're doing, and it just makes for one of those really special kind of environments.
Up next, Best Album to Totally Zone Out to on Vinyl, man. Everyone's Invited by Sports.
But what they did was make some really creative soundscapes with a lot of different kinds of music. So I would say there's a lot of funk in there and some electronica stuff, but it has this Western feel to it that you can't escape throughout the whole album. That really makes for a very chill listening experience. It's a lot of fun to just kind of sit back and let the album kind of paint these pictures for you in your mind. Sports does a really great job of that.
Up next, the award for Most Quintessentially 2018 Musical Act. And the Golden Wofford goes to I'm With Her.
Sarah Watkins, Sarah Jarosz, and Alfie O'Donovan. I got the chance to see them this year. They released an album last year, but I feel like a lot of their songs were still pretty applicable to kind of state and things that are happening now. But their show is one of the best that I got to see this year, and I actually had to go over to Arkansas to check them out in 2018. But it was worth the trip because the harmonies and delicateness that they bring to their songs are really unique. And kind of, I heard a lot of great songs this year that had that stronger edge and that more forceful kind of trying to understand what's happening and where we are, but also you get the folks like I'm With Her who are able to do that, but also approach things in a more softer, subdued way. And I think really their just really delicate harmonies really lend itself to that feeling of kind of immersing yourself into a comfortable, warm environment with these great songs.
And finally, the award for Song of 2018. And the Golden Wofford goes to Lucky by Carter Sampson.
Lucky kind of talks about all the things that she's happy about in her life and says, well, I'm lucky. Yeah, I mean, we're talking about kind of the world maybe seem big and tough, and there's a lot of things happening in it right now that a lot of people may not understand or really want to really engage with a lot of the time. And it can be kind of heavy and difficult, but these kind of little songs like what Lucky was able to do and say, we have these things that we should be thankful for and be happy for. Because when we really sit down and look at it, we have a lot of blessings that we can count.
And that concludes the 2018 Golden Wofford Awards. Congratulations to this year's winners, and we look forward to listening in on a wonderful musical new year. Cheers to 2019, another great year in local music. Good night. Welcome back to Tulsa Talks. I'm your host, Anna Bennett. Let's get back to my conversation with artist and educator Mazen Abufadil, who explains how his work ended up displayed in the Gilcrease Museum.
It was kind of one thing led to another. One of my colleagues at school had met an individual at the Gilcrease and said, "Hey, you got to meet this person, a great person." So I said, "Okay," and I gave her a call, went over there, did a little tour with the Gilcrease. And I don't know how it got all connected, and I found myself having another conversation with one of the curators, the art history curator there. And he had asked a couple of questions about what do you think of this concept of kind of looking into the immigration element, considering that you are an immigrant that has become an American citizen. And then how does that tie in with the Gilcrease artworks? The artists who are immigrants, naturalized immigrants, that are, we don't ever think about them having been from another country originally. Like we talk about people we know, like Audubon, like that, or major artists like Bierstadt or like Moran, the big Gilcrease names.
Yeah. You think of Moran and Audubon especially as like American.
Right. And of course we all become American. We live here and but we have different backgrounds and different perspectives on the world, and we bring it together, and that's what makes America, And so I really liked the idea that he had about not only shedding light on the fact that these individuals were also immigrants, but that there are immigrants that are here locally that are working in their mediums, and then he'd asked if I'd be interested in that concept and exhibiting there. I said, oh, God, yeah, of course, the Gilcrease, what are you talking about? It was amazing that I even, come close to having something like that. That's amazing. Every human being throughout the world for eons makes art.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
What is it? Something drives us. And it's not all visual art. We make sounds, we make music, we perform, we do all kinds of stuff. Definitely something binds us as human beings.
Yeah, it's just like a universal need to make.
Yeah.
Days after this interview, I found myself standing under the sycamore tree just outside the office. I remembered Mazen's off-the-record realization, so I looked up and saw the sycamore tree for the first time. Each pale branch stood in crisp definition against the electric blue sky. The few remaining leaves still clutched on shook in the wind, moving as individual and independent husk-like sails. The bark on the tree, I realized, contained a multitude of milky colors, muted browns, pale creams, even soft blues that might have been painted on by an artist. I drank in the image, and I knew my eyes were indeed, as Mazen had said, the best camera. So I kept my phone in my pocket and looked instead. Click. Thanks for listening to Tulsa Talks. We've had a blast bringing you Season 1. It's been an adventure and a labor of love for all of us. And I'm thrilled to announce that Season 2 begins on January 2nd. And we've got some super awesome guests on the roster that I can't tell you about just yet, but that I know you're going to love. If you've enjoyed this podcast, then all we want for Christmas is a rating, review, subscription, or a share. We'd love to find some positive feedback in our stockings this year. Every episode, we play you out with some local music. In the spirit of the season, today's selection is Hey Skinny Santa from J.D. McPherson's new Christmas album, Socks.
Chicago, the secret to the pizza there is in the dough. Italian beef with jardinary, hot and sweet. Papa Polo sausage on Maxwell Street. Windy City popcorn with caramel and cheese. Adds a couple notches to his belt with ease. We gotta get some gumbo in, then we're late. Santa needs a pot of crawfish and etouffee. And me jambalaya, Santa don't stop. A fried oyster, pork boy, and a nice lanyard. Fill him up with beignets and a box of pralines. We'll get his red bridges busting at the seams. Hey, Mr. Santa, how's it looking? That 42 waistline, you better get cooking. We need a big Santa. It's almost Christmas time. To keep the big man running. Hey, Mr. Santa, how's it looking? That 52 waistline, you better get cooking. We need a big Santa. It's almost Christmas time. Beat it down low over Memphis town. Find a favorite barbecue and pass it around. Biscuits, grits, and gravy, and some chow chow too. Tomatoes for the reindeer crew.
To purchase this album and find upcoming tour dates, visit jdmcpherson.com. This episode of Tulsa Talks was brought to you by the Gilcrease Museum. You can follow us at Tulsa People on Twitter and Instagram, or visit our home on the web, tulsapeople.com. Tulsa Talks is a Langdon Publishing production, recorded right here in beautiful downtown Tulsa, Oklahoma.